The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Welcome to it. Tuesdays here at Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. Connor Clark is in with us. He's got that aura behind him as he's sitting where I'm usually at. If you're streaming the show, you can see all of it. The Hail Varsity YouTube channel, the Hail Varsity Radio Twitter handle at HVarsity Radio. I'm at home. I pretend to be a decent father. I try to be. Junior takes the mound for the opening round of city baseball. So I'm going to go there and pace around as a nervous father with my kid on the hill. I will go stand off by myself and just grumble to myself every time there's not an outside corner given, or he just flat out spikes one into the ground and makes the catcher freak out. So that's on the docket for me. In a little bit, as Connor is there, and Elijah's driving the bus, baby, and Connor and Elijah will take it home. And find Elijah on Twitter at Herbal Essence. Find Connor Clark. Take it down slowly at C_Clark_27. Chris Schmidt. We're busy, guys. Got a question for the room. I will pose it to you, Elijah, then you, Connor. Is it in bad form to buy a birthday bottle for a friend, only to open that birthday bottle? Coach Brett had a 49th birthday last night, got invited over for burgers. Brett's a dear friend. You bring him some Tito's, and I ended up opening his Tito's. Just had one. But that said, it's like I brought the gift just to imbibe a little. Was that poor form? I think
the key with something like that is enjoying it together. Like
he didn't have one.
Did you say like, hey, you mind if I crack this open, we can have one?
No, I didn't. He grabbed the bottle and he put it down in front of me. He's like, open it. I'm like, man, it's your birthday.
And that's not poor form. That's not even it's one thing if you show up to the birthday party and like you have the gift bag and you pull it out yourself and then you crack it open and you pour yourself one and then you hand it to the guy
before you even give it to him.
It's another thing completely if you give it to him, then he sets it in front of you and says, you better have one. If you're getting it from me, you better have one.
There was an exchange. I handed him the Tito's and then it was okay.
Oh, no, it was a double handoff.
It was. It spent time on his bar cart.
Yeah, that's the good. Black 41 flash reverses of birthday gifts right there. You hand it off to one guy, gets handed right back. Oh, it's a trick play. He's not taking it.
And all of a sudden, the gift giver is opening the bottle, and then everything's going nuts.
Right. No, I just had to get comfort from you two on that. So now I know you guys don't ever invite me to anything. That's fine. Totally get it. But I know you won't see Schmidt show up and he just started drinking the host's stuff. We've got a derby party coming up this Saturday.
It'd be a lot funnier if you gifted a bottle to somebody and it was already half gone. Like that. That'd be a funny gift where I'd be
you
like,
haven't done that before?
No.
No?
I love how one of you thinks that's like a sin and the other one thinks it's normal.
There's like that's like a Tuesday. Like, are you kidding? Like if I'm gonna give a bottle to somebody, you got to take the troll toll.
I'm kind of kidding. Yeah. So let's move on. Let's talk a little football and hoops today and all that good stuff. So we'll get into this with Mitch Sherman here in about 15 minutes. Get his take on things as Mitch dives into Coach Rule and development at Nebraska that's imperative. MSN has a story out on Dylan Raiola. They've been following him a little bit with his Elite 11 performance and the fact that there's no timeline. Guys, what do you make of this? Numbers to get in, 489-1240, Chris at HailVarsity.com, and you can watch the show Hail Varsity YouTube, Hail Varsity Radio, Twitter at HVarsity Radio. Suh is in town. the Barstool Husker account tweeting a shot of Suh, and it looked current. I'm not knocking their photography skills, but how nice is that if Suh's in town? Huh? Does that mean more NIL fundage? Asking out loud. But it's cool to have Suh presumably back on campus.
Well, our on-campus source is in studio today with Connor Clark, and I don't know, Connor, what are you hearing? I mean, you went and got a picture with Urban Meyer. You saw Urban Meyer. I'm surprised you didn't see Suh today.
Well, I left too early. I mean, because I found out about that when you sent that picture into our group chat before the show. So it's cool that he's back. I mean, obviously one of the most dominant players in Nebraska history.
Also, a noted funder of the Nebraska Athletic Department. When you look at the current weight room as they're moving to a new weight room, and Ndamukong Suh's got his name and picture all over those walls. He was a noted donor there. I think it's not a bad idea if you're both Trev Alberts and Matt Rule to say, hey, we have the highest paid defensive tackle as of right now in NFL history, being an alumni. He's already been a generous donor to the University of Nebraska. And hey, guess what? Kind of feels like that bridge has fallen into disrepair between the two of us over the last couple of years. Let's work now. We got a new head football coach. We have an athletic director still only about a year removed from taking this job. 2 years removed from taking this job now. I think you look at that and you say, let's build a bridge back to one of the most prominent donors within the past 10 years of Husker football where there's no bridge. It seems to make a lot of sense to me.
It does, and you want to celebrate and promote. This gets into our 3-star, 4-star discussion, our NFL draft weekend discussion, right? Guys your age and kids that are playing now remember Suh. They remember Levante. They remember Prince. They remember Randy. And they remember Amir. I mean, there's still some of them remember Rex. There's a handful of guys that still resonate with kids in Texas or kids out in California or Florida. There's a lot of fans of some of those former Huskers. You just don't have as many to choose from now. So you need to get him on campus for a ball game. You need to figure out a way. You just had Frank back. I'm not saying you have to have Bo back or he'd even agree to do it, but you have to make sure Bo's cool with Nebraska now because Suh's a big Pelini guy. That fence has to be mended, and Trev did nothing wrong. It's not his fault. He walked into this, and he had a lot of garbage bags to clean up things. But that's one thing that no doubt pissed Suh off. They whacked Bo and punted him, and even though Suh would have been with Mike Riley, he would have transferred to Oregon State had he not connected with Bo and stayed in Lincoln. So it wasn't a Riley thing per se, but just how it went down. So you need to, if it hasn't already, clearly he's in Lincoln, which is good. But you just have some movement here on the NIL front. Who's going to be kind of heading that up with Nebraska? You've got a new announcement today on that. Not anything apart from 1890, but within the athletic department administration. Get Suh there and get all your names to come back. I mean, you saw Rule do that initially with Randy. I mean, Randy's had his struggles, but Randy's still a guy that is pretty sweet off the edge. Just signed a monster deal with the Donks, and if he can stay healthy, is still a warrior on third down to go get your quarterback. I mean, those are the guys you need to highlight, and that plays into making sure, fellas, that NFL drafts moving forward have more than 2 Huskers go on the third day.
Well, to combine a couple things that we've talked about within the past couple weeks, yesterday, Matt Rule, he laid out how he wants to tie together his vision, his style of coaching with what the tradition is at Nebraska. It's weighted at Baylor, it's weighted at Temple, and he says, I want to be able to merge what has worked here in the past with my own personal style to find something that's going to work for the modern college football with me and for this university. I mean, Nebraska has been built on dominant defenses, and the last dominant defense we saw was 2009. Why don't you go back and use that resource as, hey, this is only 13 years ago. What worked for you guys that made it work so well that you were the number one scoring defense in the country. You had a Heisman candidate on the defensive line. Like
an angry defensive tackle and generational talent. I mean, that's what worked on defense.
We're talking about that. So, like, I think you go build connections with that group, with that 2009, 2010 defense. Maybe talk to Carl Pliny, see if you can at least get a conversation with Bo. I mean, that kind of goes back to our conversation a couple weeks ago. Maybe you can't get back and honor Bo at the spring game, but say, hey, man, really appreciate what you did at Nebraska. What worked for you? And maybe you get an answer from Bo, maybe you don't. But it kind of brings me to my next point of, like, at what point do you bring back that 2009 defense and honor them? Maybe not the team as a whole. That 2009 defense, they set a whole bunch of records. You had a Heisman candidate defensive tackle. When does that happen? I mean, there's playmakers all over that defense. A lot of guys who made it in the NFL off that defense. At what point do you get to the era where you say, hey, to be honest, you guys were the last great Husker team, the last Husker team that came within an eyelash of beating a team that went to the national championship game just a couple of weeks later in Texas. Like, what that 2009, 2010 team put together, I know it wasn't a conference title. I know it wasn't an appearance in a national title game, but what they put together was the best we have seen since Frank Solich. And I'm wondering at what point that team, or at least that defense, gets honored at Nebraska in the same way as Frank Solich.
That'd be funny, and it'd be appropriate. Hey, offense, there's a few of you that were okay. Roy, Brandon Kenny, Mike McNeil, some of the offensive line. No offense, you guys were pretty solid, but we can't in good faith invite the offense of 09 not to be honored.
Yeah, we get Niles Paul back. Niles
is awesome. Yeah. Niles, thanks for everything. Thanks for Columbia. Thanks for the kickoff in 2010 against Okie State. But the defense, you guys are welcome. Go to the TO suite. You guys go hang out, have a good time. Here's some punch and cookies. Do your thing. But yeah, you have to kind of honor everybody or not at all. That's just my take. Hey, let's talk a minute here, and I know we'll get into it with Mitch on just eyeing talent, developing talent, and then producing NFL talent. You're going to win with NFL guys. Coach McBride always says you want to be a good coach, you get good players. And I think it's okay if you're a Nebraska fan, just from what you can go on with spring, to say Matt Rule is going to keep his track record going. There's no guarantees, but I think with some of the young guys you saw, you feel pretty good about eyeing talent and then wanting to develop that talent. And if Rule can land some high-profile guys, 4- and 5-star guys eventually, be different, as in make those guys better so they thrive on the field and get drafted higher, that's obvious. But also keep your track record of finding those 3-star guys and sending them to the NFL. I mean, Nebraska needs more NFL talent, not just portal, but get guys from high school that you take with you all the way through their career and keep them out of the portal.
And I think you have guys currently on this roster that are going to be great case studies into what Matt Rule's development at Nebraska looks like. At first, I look at the defensive line. We saw some young guys that were showing out in the spring game. I know. You don't have to say it. You don't have to call me. You don't have to email me. You don't have to tweet at me. I know. It's just a spring game. You can't take it with too much seriousness. It's just a spring game. But with that being said, I think from the eye test point of view, Nebraska's got 3 dudes on that defensive line that can be, at some point in time, dudes for this defense. And Cam Linhart, Prince Wolumamalin, I think I got that right. I've been doing
did. Wow.
Yeah, thank you very much. And then you also have a guy in A.J. Rollins that just moved from the offensive side to the defensive side. 3 guys, I think they showed their potential in the spring game. They're not there just yet, but 3 great case studies to follow of what does Matt Rule's development at Nebraska look like? Can Matt Rule turn these guys into guys, maybe not first-round draft picks, but day 1 or 2, guys that are going to go in the top 3 rounds? I think that'd be a success for all of those guys if they end up in the top 3 rounds. I'm not saying all those guys end up there, but I think they all have the potential to end up there based on what we've seen from Matt Rule's track record with developing guys like them. And on the offensive side of the ball, you have guys like that. I mean, Xavier Betts is a guy that we've all seen a wealth of talent in. That's a guy that should be an NFL guy based on his measurables. Can he put it all together? Can this staff figure it out and develop him, turn him into an NFL wide receiver? That's a case study for your offensive side of the ball. Gabe Ervin as well. That's a guy physically could be an NFL back someday. I don't think we've seen it just yet, but all guys that you can follow and say, hey, does Matt Rule turn these guys at some point down the road into NFL guys? And hey, let's not forget, Jeff Sims is a guy that's been talked about. Hey, he's got the arm talent to go be an NFL guy. He's got worlds of athleticism. Can you turn him into the next great NFL dual threat quarterback?
Connor, the best specimen I see on offense right now, and I'm going to go away from the offensive line. If I'm going to say, here's my future pro on offense for Nebraska, I think Grant has got it. I think he just looks different. I think he just looks explosive. I know he's got to be better between the tackles, but Grant's the guy I'm picking at a position of prominence for Nebraska football, and I think Grant could be that guy.
Well, he's got it now, right? Because you have the departure of A.J. Allen in the transfer portal. Obviously, we don't know where he's going yet, but, I agree. I think Grant can be that guy in the running back room that you need to have perform, and you have Gabe Ervin right behind him who put together a nice spring game performance as well. I'll go back to what Elijah just said. You don't have to tell us that it was just a spring game. We all know, but he can be an explosive guy for this offense, one that Nebraska is going to have to count on a lot this year, I would imagine, especially in that first game against Minnesota. If things aren't working out through the air, running will travel more than obviously passing the ball. So that's going to be a big point of emphasis. I agree. I think Anthony Grant could be a huge guy in this running back room. And we saw what he can do last year as well and what he can do on the ground.
Well, we'll get to the phone calls. Mitch Sherman coming up. Reminder about Dyer Law, personal injury. Have you been hurt in a personal injury accident? You can count on Dyer Law and the team to provide you with a helping hand when you need it, no matter what you're dealing with. Call Dyer Law and the team today at 402-393-7529 or visit Dyer.law to chat with a trusted professional for your personal injury claim. That's Dyer.law. Quick timeout. Mitch Sherman's next.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back with you, it's Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. Mitch Sherman joins us from The Athletic at Mitch Sherman on Twitter is where you find him. Mitch, how's the week going? Thanks for taking a few minutes.
It's going all right. A little windy, but that seems to be improving. So otherwise fine. Good week of football. Got the transfer portal shut down. So NFL draft is over. Kind of starting to move on to summer type things.
Well, Mitch, all you can hope for with that high wind is that the wind's blowing out on the baseball fields tonight.
It's not always good when it's blowing out. You got to pitch too.
Yeah, and we're just going to leave it that we don't need any extra help for opposing offenses against Junior tonight, Mitch. All right, and Elijah. Wind can blow in. Just keep it low in the strike zone. Mitch, a lot's gone on. We're going to tackle plenty of it, and specifically your story in The Athletic on Nebraska and the 3-star U story. We'll get there in a minute, but it's been a week since we talked to you. There's been some things that have transpired. Casey Thompson off to the portal and A.J. Allen off to the portal. Not super surprised by either, but a hit for Nebraska's offense nonetheless. Were you taken aback, or did you think this was a possibility for Casey and A.J.?
Well, Casey first. Yeah, I thought it was a possibility. I thought the farther Nebraska got away from the initial influx into the quarterback room, which was Jeff Sims coming in December. Nebraska survived the early out period where Casey Thompson could have chosen to leave. He's a graduate, so he can go essentially anytime at any semester break, and he could have left and been somewhere new for the spring. And I think looking back at it 6 months ago or 4 months ago, I would have expected that there was more of a likely chance that he would leave before the spring than after the spring. But he was hurt, so that was a factor. He wouldn't have been able to go to a new school and start running that offense and practice until the summer anyway. I think he wanted to see how this thing played out, and I think he wanted to look around the country and see what kind of situations may crop up. Would there be an injury at another destination in the spring? Would somebody else transfer out? And it's somewhat unrealistic to expect that any program especially a program like Nebraska that's just gone through a coaching change and has had a number of losing seasons in a row, it's unlikely for any program to have two quarterbacks with the experience that Casey Thompson and Jeff Sims have on their roster heading into a season. You usually only get one of those guys. Some programs have none of those guys. So from that perspective, it's not all that surprising that Nebraska's in this position, but disheartening that it went way down to the end. And it looked like if they could have weathered a few more days, then they would have been better off at the QB spot going into August, which undeniably would have been the case if Casey Thompson was there to compete with Jeff Sims.
Mitch, before we get into A.J. Allen, is that just the way college football is moving now that, you know what, fall quarterback competitions are a thing of the past? Now they're going to happen in spring, and if you don't win the job, you go hit the portal in the summer. Is that just what college football is going to be moving forward, at least from what you've seen and what you think?
Yeah, I think more often than not, you're going to encounter situations undoubtedly where there are fall competitions. You can look at quarterbacks transferring into Alabama, for instance, and there's going to be a quarterback competition there. And you know, I haven't studied it enough or looked at the trends enough to know if maybe the highly successful programs are the ones that are more likely to have that competition in August. That seems to make a little bit of sense, just winging it here, but we've seen it at Nebraska for quite a while, that these competitions generally play out in the spring more often than they do in August. I think that can be beneficial for a team. You know, coaches recognize that, and they kind of orchestrate these things to work when it's best on their calendar. You don't ideally want to be in a spot where you're determining your starting quarterback right up until the days before the first game of the year. You'd like to have it known in April, but that's not always the reality. And I don't think there's going to be a cut and dry, all situations fit one model kind of deal going forward, Elijah. I think some schools will still have competitions in August, but for the most part, they're going to. I think Nebraska's the norm with the way that it looks right now with Sims, as opposed to the exception.
Mitch, would it surprise you if A.J. Allen ends up in a Power 5 league, rushing for 1,000 yards next year or sometime before his career's done?
Before his career's done, I think so. You know, I think he still can get bigger and stronger. And he's just been out of high school for 1 year and less than a year. And he was injured last season and rehabbing from that, and then had a new staff to adjust to. So he's by no means a finished product. And, you know, what we saw of A.J. Allen at the running back spot early in the season last year before that injury, I think excited a lot of people and led people to believe that he was going to be a 1,000-yard rusher someday at Nebraska. So I do think he'll find a home in the Power 5. I think he's that kind of a player. You know, some guys transfer, and it's easy to project that they're going to go Group of 5 or they're going to go down a level to FCS. And I don't think that's the case at all with A.J. Allen. I mean, he was the most impressive freshman on the roster for Nebraska last year offensively. And, Ernest Hausman was that guy on the defensive side, and they're both gone through this coaching transition. So even when coaching transitions go smoothly, as I think this one has by all accounts, you know, you still lose some of the connections that you have, especially with young players in the program. When freshmen come in, they have connections with the coaching staff that recruited them. Older players in the program tend to be more connected to the university and the whole campus in general because they've been a part of that thing for years. So in the case of Ernest Hausman, to go back to that December disappointment, and now A.J. Allen, these guys have been here just a matter of months, and the connection for them, I think, ran deepest when it came to the old staffs that recruited them, and that's largely why they're no longer a part of this thing.
Mitch, whenever you look at this transfer, do you think it's an indicator to you that this running back battle might not be wrapped up, but it is getting there? The pecking order of these running backs might be getting closer and closer to being set in stone based on the fact that A.J. Allen, who's very talented, from what we saw in the spring game, probably wasn't going to be in that top 2 mix. And as I said, I don't think it's set in stone, but it feels like it's getting there. Is that the feel you're getting as well?
I think that there's a race that's still to be determined at the running back spot. If AJ had established himself as the number one guy or 1A through the spring, then I think there's a better chance that he would have stayed. I don't think that his place on the depth chart was a driving force behind why he decided to leave. I don't think he felt the same kind of fit with the new staff that he did with Brian Applewhite, with Mickey Joseph. You know, those two coaches brought him here And AJ never would have been at Nebraska in the first place if not for the relationships that he had with the two of them. So you put new coaches in, and as qualified and adept and as good of a job as those guys are doing on the offensive side or might be doing on the offensive side, that's just not the same as what AJ had with his connection last season. So they're not in a bad spot by any means at running back. And I understand what you're asking about the depth situation. I don't think it pushed AJ out, but it leaves Nebraska in a spot where you have Gabe Ervin, Anthony Grant, and Ramir Johnson, all as talented, established, experienced running backs. And, I made some depth chart projections, offensive side, that'll be up on the Athletic site and app tomorrow. And then we'll do the defense and special teams later in the week. And I wrote in my analysis of the running backs that it wouldn't surprise me to see any one of those three with the ball in their hands in crunch time during a game in the fourth quarter, third quarter next season, any one of those three. And I would have put AJ in that same spot had he still been here. It could have been any one of the four. But much like a quarterback where you don't usually have two established, experienced veteran quarterbacks, it's pretty unlikely to have four running backs that fill that responsibility too.
Mitch, let's talk a little bit here about the athletics project with going through different programs. Who was able to recruit, develop, and then send 4-star, 3-star, 5-star talents to the NFL? Are you bringing pros to campus? And Nebraska was respectable with the number of 3-stars they were able to put into the NFL over the last 11 plus seasons. 4-star prospects, not so much, just 4 out of 65. Let's look at Coach Rule here. Mitch, he's been really good wherever he's been at finding either some off-the-radar guys or under-starred players and putting guys into the league. That speaks to his eye for talent, but it also speaks to his ability to develop.
Yeah, you always want to go out and get the best players you can sign. You want to sign 4- and 5-star guys, and I think there's just the feeling that they're going to produce NFL draft. You're going to produce NFL draft picks with that level of signee more often than anything else, and that's generally true. It interestingly didn't really hold up at Nebraska over the last 11 years. Our David Ubbin and Ari Wasserman and Mitch Light, they spearheaded this project, and it published before the draft on the Athletic, and they looked nationally at all of the Power 5 programs and how they fared in putting 5-star talent, as you mentioned, Chris, into the draft, 4-star, 3-star, and so on. Really, they stopped at 3-star. They didn't grade how programs did with the walk-ons or the 2-star prospects. And what we found was that Nebraska was the worst in the country at taking those 4-star players, and over an 11-year period from the 09 to 19 signing classes, so it's the 2012 to 22 drafts, and turning them into draft picks. Now, there were guys among those 4-star prospects who ended up in the NFL, signed at free agent deals, but, rounds 1 through 7, just 4 out of 65. And, that just speaks to, I think, a lot of dysfunction in the Nebraska program, coaching change, transition, things that, you just didn't have continuity and consistency. And players ended up being the fall guys on that because they weren't coached consistently over the entirety of their careers in a lot of instances. Of those 4, it was 2 offensive linemen, somewhat recent. Matt Farniak and Cam Jurgens were 4-star signees who were drafted. And then you had Randy Gregory and Damian Stafford as a couple of defensive players early in the study who came out of junior college. Both of them did. And the rest of it is other 61 players. 4-stars are it's just a list of player after player after player, who didn't pan out for this reason or that reason, or they transferred. And, it was just like symptomatic of the upheaval that we've seen, from Pelini to Riley to Frost, and then, from now Frost to Rule. And so what Matt Rule wants to do is clean that up and just make this a more functional program. And, he's shown the ability to do that at his previous 2 stops, although it was just 4 years at Temple and 3 at Baylor, more so with the 3-star guys than with the 4-star guys. They signed 8 4-star players in 3 years under Rule at Baylor. And interestingly, just one of those players is made it as an NFL draft pick to this point. So, his sweet spot as you mentioned, has been with those 3-star guys, with players like Hassan Reddick, who weren't highly regarded, somebody that he inherited at Baylor, with a guy like Jalen Petra, who you hear Matt Rule talk about all the time still at Nebraska here, because it's a huge success story of his. It was his first recruit at Baylor, the only guy who stayed committed to the Baylor program through that coaching change that led to Matt Rule. And he turned him into an NFL player who's now thriving in the league as a 3-star prospect. So, as you watch what Nebraska does over these, next period of months in recruiting, I think it's important to know what Matt Rule's strength is as a recruiter in finding NFL talent, but also important to know that he's going to have to up the game, and that Nebraska is on a different level with where it has to recruit to compete in the Big Ten than certainly Temple was, and even where Baylor was in the Big 12. They've got to be able to find 4-star guys and get them to stick with the program and then turn into NFL draft picks.
Mitch Sherman's with us at Hail Varsity Radio. Mitch with The Athletic, at Mitch Sherman on Twitter, as we're talking some of the athletics recruiting study done with 4-star, 3-star, and 5-star. Mitch, as you look at 5-star guys, they're more than likely going to get that shot in the NFL, probably with a 1st through 3rd round projection, or at least a likelihood there. 4-star, it comes down to can you get that impact? Can they stay healthy? 4 stars, it seems like you're supposed to not mess them up, right? But a lot of programs have not always delivered. I like kind of going back to Temple, and when Coach Rule talks about, we put a lot of guys into the league from Temple, and a lot of those guys were off the radar. I think if you can combine, you hit on your 4 stars, you don't screw them up. You have a plan for the 3-star, and then go get me the Janos or Brandon Riley's 2-star guys that I think about from Nebraska that were walk-ons, that I know Riley was flirting with practice squads, and I know Jano spent quite a bit of time in the NFL. I mean, those are a lot of the stories that successful Nebraska programs can tell and have told for a lot of years.
Yeah, Andy Janovich, was a 0-star prospect coming out of Gretna as a walk-on fullback, and he was a draft pick. So, his success story does not factor in the data of this study, because he wasn't even a 3-star, which is as low as we went in looking at how schools, turned that talent into success. We couldn't really assess the 0 stars just because there's not enough data on those guys. Right. You're not going to hit at a high rate of walk-ons, no matter who you are. But if you find Spencer Long from Elkhorn and you find Andy Janovich, then and you turn them into NFL draft picks, well, then that's obviously another piece to the puzzle where Nebraska has had success in the past, and had some success even over this 11-year period that we looked at. It just didn't show up in the data because there simply wasn't enough nationally to analyze.
Mitch, looking at the data, was there a consistent thread of things that teams that did do a good job developing 3 stars, 4 stars, and 5 stars did, that the schools like Nebraska that really failed in their development of 3 stars, 4 stars, and 5 stars failed to do? Is there any consistent thread of here's what you should do if you want to be a program that develops these guys at a high level?
Well, I think at first it's important to note that not all 3 stars are created equal, and that like this 3 stars that Nebraska signed are considerably higher rated overall than the 3 stars that Kansas signed. So you think, okay, it stands to reason why Nebraska had a better 3-star hit rate than Kansas or, Oregon State. But yeah, I mean, the things that the common thread that went from school to school that had success at any level, with the 5 stars, with the 4 stars, and with the 3 stars, are what you'd expect. It was coaching consistency. It was consistently winning games, which helps you retain players. All the kinds of things that good programs do were very evident at the top of those rankings. I had a list that I wrote out that I'm not looking at right now with the schools that did the best on the 3 stars. And it was like Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, Michigan. I mean, you understand why that is, because these programs are winning big. And, not only that, they're recruiting the best 3 stars. So if a guy is ranked 500th in the country, he's going to Michigan, that might be better than the 3-star player that Michigan State signed. That's just a off the cuff example, but I don't, the guys who put the thing together, I think they had a better handle nationally on what the trends were. I look closely at Nebraska, and I know on those 4-stars, on those 61 out of 65 who didn't turn into draft picks, there was not one specific thing or 2 specific things other than what was happening in the program that I think held them back. It was, some transferred, some were busts, some got injured, some got disinterested, whatever it might be. And I think that's probably the case as you look at every program around the country.
Mitch, get you out of here on this, and thanks for a few minutes. I think of Michigan State with D'Antonio, where he didn't always get 5- and 4-star guys, but he nailed a lot of guys that were maybe on some other programs' radar, but he got them. Then I think of Iowa. I think of what they have done with not only their in-state kids, but also when they make their way into Chicago or just kind of the Midwest, whether they go to Wisconsin or Minnesota to get some kids. But Michigan State in their heyday did a great job of developing and Iowa's always been pretty consistent. I think of Josie Jewell, right? I mean, I think of Josie Jewell as a guy that is still doing well for Denver, as a small-town Iowa kid that somebody at Iowa just saw and said, that guy's a football player. We're going to offer him a scholarship.
He's a Decorah, Iowa turkey farmer. So,
yeah,
Iowa finds those guys really well, and they've done it better than Nebraska, which, is disheartening to Nebraska and Nebraskans and Nebraska fans over the past several years, but that's just the reality of it. And seemingly there's a first-round draft pick from the state of Iowa who was a 3-star that signed with the Hawkeyes just about every year. Lucas Van Ness was that guy this year, and it's been year after year after year. Tyler Linderbaum, the center, a year ago was a first-round pick. Iowa's just consistently done that, and that's reflective in the success that the Hawkeyes have had in the division, and I think it's reflective in their ability to continue to go recruit those players. Some of it is cyclical, and if these players, who have that ability and who have that drive and are generally the ones that, are built to be able to turn themselves, some of it's got to be internal to turn themselves into first-round picks, and they see a program like Iowa that's doing that on an almost annual basis, they're more likely to go sign with that school than they are to go out of state and sign with Nebraska. Those are the players that Nebraska used to get, and that Nebraska would go to the state of Missouri and find a very motivated 3-star player who probably shouldn't have been given 3 stars. These things aren't perfect. They don't measure everything. They don't necessarily measure heart and desire and motivation. And those are the players who look at what the programs that are recruiting them are doing and putting players into the NFL. And if you do it once, you do it twice, you do it 3 times in producing that kind of talent, then you're more likely to get those guys down the road.
Mitch, best of luck for baseball tonight. Thanks for a few minutes today.
All right, same to you. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Elijah.
Yeah, no problem, Mitch. As Mitch Sherman, kind enough to join us here on a Tuesday edition extended chat with Mitch Sherman as he joins us 4:25 every single Tuesday today. Kind enough to sit down for 2 segments as Chris Schmidt packs up shop. He's heading off to watch the little guy play some baseball tonight. And we'll see. With the wind, I think his little guy's on the mound.
Yes.
With the wind, I think then you hope for the wind to be blowing in for their sake.
Yes, and you hope it adds about 18 inches of curve to his curveball. So.
From an umpire's point of view, I don't think I've ever complained whenever the wind's blowing out. Like, it's fun whenever you get a whole bunch of home runs, but whenever you're the father of the pitcher, that changes some things.
That adds a whole level of stress, especially if you see the flagpoles going a little crazy out in the outfield, too. I mean, I just wish we had a camera on Schmidt the entire game and see how many paces that he takes throughout the afternoon.
We should hire like a private investigator.
We should. We should have thought of that.
As that's Elijah Herbel, Connor Clark taking you through the final segment of the first hour of Hail Varsity Radio. We'll wrap it up after this. Get a thought from Bill on Ndamukong Suh. That's coming your way after the break.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
One final time here, it's hour one of Hail Varsity Radio. Chris Schmidt out for the remainder of the show as he's watching the little guy play in some baseball. The Lincoln Reserve City Tournament going down right now, so we say good luck to Carson and the Lincoln Southwest Silverhawks. I don't root as an umpire, but for Schmidt's sake, I'll say that for now. It's Elijah Herbel and Connor Clark taking you through the remainder of this hour again, as I said, on this Election Day Tuesday. And if you're watching the stream, I'll flex it here for you for the camera. For those listening at home, I am, in fact, and Connor can confirm, wearing my I voted today sticker, encouraging you to get out to the polls if you are a resident of the city of Lincoln. As a mayoral campaign, a lot of city council seats as well, and Board of Education, all of those. And the Airport Authority. How could I forget? So many different elections going down right now. Encourage you to get out there and get voted before the polls close today. Do your civic duty. Connor, you a big voting guy? If you don't mind me asking, I don't.
Well, yeah. I mean, I do it when I need to.
Yeah, you're not from Lincoln.
I'm not a Lincolnite, so I mean, but being in the newsroom the past couple of months, I'm familiar with what's going on. The polls actually close at 8:00 tonight.
Thank you. That's why Connor Clark makes the big bucks.
So, I wouldn't say that. We're getting there, but yeah. I mean, just do your civic duty, and it's important, especially in a city like Lincoln, where the community is a lot tighter than I would say a lot of places that I've had the opportunity to either live in or just kind of stay in for a little bit. So I think it's important, and being able to cover it just a few steps that way to our right is pretty important.
So there's our little 90-second plug. If you're in the city of Lincoln, you still haven't voted yet, we encourage you. Get out and vote. It's huge. It's important. It's what makes America America. So get out and do that. Connor, before we get out of here this hour, we have a call in from Dave. Dave, a longtime listener from out in, I guess we'll call it central Nebraska. Don't want to call it western Nebraska. People will get mad at me if I say anything west of Lincoln and Omaha is western Nebraska. We love you central Nebraskans. And Dave calls in, says that while we're talking Ndamukong Suh getting back and honoring that 2009 defense, he brought up the idea, why not build a statue of Ndamukong Suh throwing Colt McCoy to the ground in the 2009 Big 12 championship game. And I think the only reason I could think to not is that Nebraska ended up losing that game. So it takes away a little bit of the luster of a statue like that. But let's also remember here, Ndamukong Suh, probably going to be the final defensive lineman in college football history to get that close to getting a Heisman. And who knows, maybe some guy will come around in 20 years. That's an absolute physical freak. But based on the way the game is changing, how offense is exploding, I don't think we're ever going to see anything like that again.
No, his season that year especially was, unlike anything we've ever seen. I get the argument to not do it because you lost the game and, it's fine. But I think the statue is more so recognizing the career of Ndamukong Suh rather than that game and that moment. Obviously, it's a cool moment. I mean, you're throwing down a rival quarterback's a rival team's quarterback rather. So I think that's cool. But
how cool would that be in front of the new facility?
Yeah, exactly.
A statue
right?
of Ndamukong Suh out there throwing Colt McCoy to the ground. That'd be awesome.
So, and I know like Nebraska fans, they like to PO Texas fans any chance that they can get. And that's a good example of it. But I think the statue is embodying his career with Nebraska, not just the moment. Obviously, again, the moment looks cool on a statue, but it's his body of work at Nebraska, and I mean, his name is on the weight training facility for a reason right now. So,
two people I'd love to see a statue of first, before you get to Ndamukong Suh, John Cook. Especially if they
he
sell
deserves one, absolutely.
I mean, with the sell it at Memorial Stadium for volleyball, build him a statue, follow it up in Ndamukong Suh. Those are the two I'll say. If you got any more, give us a call next hour, 402-489-1240. Open phone lines for you all next hour. We'll be back here in a few minutes for the hour 2 of Hail Varsity Radio.
The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Back in, it's hour 2 of Hail Varsity Radio. Elijah Herbel and Connor Clark filling in the rest of the show for Schmitty Hurrdat. For about the first 40 minutes of our show or so, he is scooted on out of here going to go watch the Sun play in the city tournament as little guy takes the mound tonight for the Lincoln Southwest Silverhawks. We wish them luck. We wish Schmitty luck as we roll through this show, and we have, dare I say, breaking news. to bring you Connor Clark. This drop in about 10 minutes ago from Mike Sauter, high school basketball extraordinaire here in the state of Nebraska. He's great work with NebraskaPreps.com as well as with Hurrdat. Mike doing a great job as the first to interview new Nebraska basketball transfer, Josiah Allick. Josiah transferring in from New Mexico after before that he was with Kansas City. UMKC, University of Missouri, Kansas City, the Roos, and the city of Kansas City, transferred off to the Mountain West and to New Mexico, and now returning back home, the North Star product. So, Connor, before we get any thoughts from you, let's get a thought here from Mike, his sit down with Josiah Allick, as Mike asked the question, well, like, what about Nebraska drew you back? More than just being the hometown school, what drew you back? And here's what Josiah had to say.
Why Nebraska?
It was I entered the portal in, I want to say it was like late March. And I've kind of spent the last like 5-6 weeks or so, just trying to find, what I felt was the right fit. And, I try to not let things like, personal relationships like with coaches or, I tried to not let the being home part of it affect my decision. I wanted to make sure that if I did pick Nebraska, it was the right basketball fit. It wasn't just, my heart, pulling at strings. And so, I really felt like with the way that Coach Hoiberg runs the team and just kind of the unselfishness that he kind of preaches and the way that the team plays and with the guys coming back and coming in that, we have a chance to do really big things. And I really see myself being a big part of that. And also, I just know that he'll be able to he's one of the coaches that will have like the most just experience and just skills to like help me get my shot back to where it was my junior year after the dip this past year. Mm-hmm. And so, they also have just unbelievable facilities and, a great sports science department that will be able to help me with my recovery from my ankle surgery I got a month ago. Mm-hmm. And, obviously, I'd be lying to say that being close to home and, have my sister there, have my family there, that's not a factor. But, it obviously is. Like, it is going to be really cool to be a part of it. But, I really made this pick because I felt like it was just the right really school that had the best chance of allowing me to continue to grow my game and help them win. So,
there's Alex's answer on why Nebraska. And before we get some more thoughts here from Mike Sauter's interview with Allick, let's quickly take you through some background on Allick. 6'8", 235-pound forward. He's got 1 year of eligibility left. Went to Lincoln North Star, as I said, last year. Started all 34 games for New Mexico. Averaged 8.5 points per game, 7.3 rebounds per game, with 2 double-doubles, and 13 times he scored in double figures. His high-scoring performance ever was 18 points last year against SMU. So we know about Josiah Allick, and you might recognize the last name. He mentioned his sister, quite the family of athletes that the Allicks have, as the oldest brother, Josiah, coming back to Nebraska. Becca, playing the Husker volleyball team, and they got the little brother, Caleb, who's currently at Waverly High as well. So that family is just athletes all over. And Mike, you can find this full interview on his Twitter page at Mike Sauter _. That's SAUTTER for Mike Sauter. He asked Josiah, well, what does it mean to you to be coming back home to a place where your sister's already a star?
Yeah, she's obviously a superstar. I'm definitely coming in under her shadow. There's no ego about it. I'm not ignorant to, the fact that she's been killing it this past year. Mm-hmm. And, just like the passion and just emotion that she plays with and just how hard she plays. It's definitely something that, the volleyball fan base in Nebraska in general is like falling in love with. And that's one thing that I know I will be able to match. Now, I hope I can match her production on the volleyball court to the basketball court. That'd be amazing for us. But, we both are very similar in that degree with just our demeanor and our attitude when it comes to competing and doing everything we can to win. So, it's exciting to be and get to do that for a year.
So there's Josiah Allick on coming back to the University of Nebraska. Connor, I know you're a guy who has been diving into the film of some of these transfers Nebraska brings in. That is now 4 transfers that Nebraska has added with Fred Hoiberg. And I want to get your thoughts here on just how it changes the complexion of this Husker basketball team. We got a full 10 minutes here to discuss. Allick, based on how I'm looking at this, I think Nebraska would be happy if this is the final transfer you get in the boat. I'm not saying that they're done and they're out completely, but whenever I look at what they've added, I think you could be comfortable with this being your team moving forward for the 2023 season.
Well, I think it's safe to say now, if it wasn't already, the bar has been raised expectation-wise, because you bring in Allick on top of Rink Mast, Bryce Williams, and most recently Aaron Eulis yesterday, so you have a pretty good span of 2 days of your Fred Hoiberg in the recruiting trail. And we already know about Fred Hoiberg when he came into Nebraska. His collegiate philosophy when it comes to recruiting is transfers, and obviously the collegiate game has swayed to his strengths, if you will, when it comes to recruiting. Allick is a guy who, you said it earlier, averaged 8.5 a game, 7.3 rebounds a game, and we wanted to talk about in this segment a potential starting 5 for Nebrasketball coming up this winter. And, well, we were talking about, we don't have Allick yet, but, we were going to go with the guys that Nebrasketball has on the roster. Well, now Allick is technically on the roster, so we can go ahead and do that, because assuming you get Keisei Tominaga back, which I think the chances of that at this point are pretty high, considering he's testing the waters in the NBA, and that's nothing against Keisei. I just don't think that he's ready and or is going to play in the NBA. But you have Eulis, Williams, Mast, Keisei, and then you throw an Allick in there. That's a pretty good starting 5 to me, because you have Eulis, who is already a Big Ten guy with Iowa, started 27 games last year.
And has a career 2-to-1 assist-to-turnover ratio as well.
Yes, good distributor. Bryce Williams, 6'7". I was telling you about this earlier. I think he might be a Griesel-esque replacement, maybe not so much of a point guard, but an athletic 6'7" guard who can get off the dribble. He can shoot the 3-ball really well. He can get to the bucket, very athletic kid. And then Rink Mast, watching some of his film, you can run a lot of what you did with Derek Walker a season ago with Mast, because he can take guys off the dribble. He can, you can kind of isolate him in the middle of the floor, in which Nebraska did a lot with Derek Walker and had a ton of success with it, by the way. And he can do something that Derek Walker couldn't really, and that's shoot the ball from distance. He can shoot the 3-ball pretty well. He's a good mid-range jumper type of guy. He's 6'9", so around the same size as Derek Walker. So that's a big plus, too. And then you add Allick, who is a hometown kid, too. You have hometown kids now in back-to-back seasons. I don't disagree. I think if you're Fred Hoiberg, if you don't lose anybody off the roster now, I think you're fine in the transfer portal. Obviously, that I think his name's Grant Nelson from North Dakota State, the 6'11" freak coming out of North Dakota State. Chances are you probably don't get him, but former teammate of Griesel, you can't help but wonder. But I think if this were to be the last commitment out of the transfer portal, if you're Fred Hoiberg and that coaching staff and a fan of the program, I think you're good for now, because I think the expectations have just been risen, and I think you got a pretty good roster heading into 2023-24.
And we were talking during one of the breaks last hour, Connor, when we were talking about what this segment was going to be, because, we were planning on talking about the 3 additions, what was still needed. We had no inside knowledge that Josiah Allick was going to be in the boat. And one of the things that you and I talked about, Connor, was the fact that where Nebraska still has a noticeable hole in this roster is at the 4, and now you don't. You have Rink Mast as your 5. Allick, who I think even if he doesn't turn the corner offensively, which he was talking about in the interview with Mike, he thinks Fred Hoiberg in this system here might be able to unlock his jump shot in a way that it kind of fell off a little bit last season. He thought, this is the system that might open it up. Even if you don't get an offensive presence from him, I think he's great with that 6'8" frame as being a guy who can be an athletic 4. I think of a Nuggets guy that always stands out in my memory, the Manimal, Kenneth Faried, where did Kenneth Faried have a polished jump shot? Hell no. Was Kenneth Faried an offensive weapon? No. Kenneth Faried got up. Kenneth Faried dunked. He brought energy, and then defensively, he was a guy that always gave 110% on that end of the floor. I think that's what you have in a guy with Allick, and it frees you up. If you want to go big, quote unquote, you can go Allick at the 4, you can go Rink Mast at the 5. If you want to go small, you can pull Allick to the side. You can go 4 guards, probably Williams, Eulis, Casey and maybe Jamarcus Lawrence being your 4 guards around Rink Mast. Now you can have small ball in the Big Ten if you encounter a matchup that works for that. I think this is the addition for Nebraska basketball, assuming that Allick fits in the way that Fred Hoiberg and his staff see being a defensive guy, and you'll take what you can get offensively. I look at that, and I think it gives them a whole lot more flexibility, and I think if this is it for Nebraska basketball in the transfer portal, I think you have put together a roster that can at least compete in the Big Ten. Now, we'll have to get Jacob Dilla's take on this, and Connor, I trust your opinion and your film study here, but whenever I look at this as being anything on top of what Nebraska has now potentially would be a luxury. Whenever you talk about, what was the guy's name from North Dakota State?
Grant Nelson.
It kind of reminds me of a mini Kristaps and how he plays in terms of a little bit unicorn, can shoot the ball well at 6'11", pretty athletic there. I'm not saying he's like Kristaps, but whenever you remember what Kristaps was coming out for the draft, I think he was like a 7'2" kind of similar mold guy where he can hit the 3, he can dribble the ball with effectiveness. That's what I look at with Nelson. But I think anything on top of what Nebraska has now could be seen as just a luxury. I think they have the necessities down for this basketball team next year.
Well, I'd like to actually call myself out here because it just crossed my mind, and I'm forgetting somebody very, very important on this roster, and that's Juwan Gary, too.
Oh, yeah.
Where does Juwan Gary fit into this puzzle? Because I think you insert him back into the starting lineup, so I want to take back what I said earlier. And even if you wanted to go Williams, Ulis, Casey, Juwan, and then whoever you want to plug in at the 5, that's still a pretty tall lineup because you don't forget that Gary's like 6'6", 6'7". Williams is already 6'7". Mast is 6'9". Allick is 6'8". So, or if you really wanted to get big, too, you could go small ball. Obviously, we just ran through that lineup. You could get big, too, if you really needed to, and start either Ulis or Lawrence at the point guard position because I think Lawrence's production time is going to go up this season, as it should. You could start one of them at the point guard. You could go Williams, Gary, Mast, Allick, 2. So that leaves a lot of interesting possibilities out there for a starting 5 for Fred Hoiberg. And again, it depends on the matchup and who you're playing. But there's a really good amount of mix and match type of things that you could do with a starting 5 or even with a second group off the bench because you realize what you can get out of C.J. Wilcher down the stretch. You realize what you can get out of Sam Hoiberg down the stretch, too. He can come in and actually give you quality minutes of basketball. Obviously, his defense could use some work, but he's an athletic enough kid, and he's got his heart in the right place when he's out there.
And what stands out about him is you can tell he's a coach's son and how he plays the game. He's a smart defender. What he lacks in physicality and in pure athleticism, he makes up in his knowledge of the game, similar to a guy like Nikola Jokic. Not going to beat you with athleticism, but the way he knows the game, he's always going to be in the right spot, and he knows his moments to take chances.
Well, yeah, and he was a part of the scout team for 75% of the year last year, too, so he already knows what to expect from the other team, too. So, yeah, he's a very intelligent player. You have Jamarcus Lawrence, as we just hit on, had a phenomenal end of last season. So you have a lot of guys, and I'm probably forgetting people here. I don't have the roster right in front of me, but you have a lot of guys off the bench, too. I mean, you could potentially go 9 deep, and that's big in the Big Ten, too. You need to have that depth because you saw with Gary going down and Bandamel going down, Hoiberg had to get creative, and now when he got creative, it worked. I'm not saying he can't get creative, but there's just a lot of interesting possibilities. I know it's only May 2nd right now, and there's a long way to go in this whole process. There's could be some guys who leave, but this is fascinating to me, and I think this could be one of the more anticipated Nebrasketball seasons there has been in a handful of years. And I'm not trying to overplay the commitment of Allick or anything, but I think you have a really solid roster top to bottom, and you have a team that can be competitive. I mean, the team last year went 9-11 in the Big Ten. I mean, I think you have a team that's better than 9-11 in the Big Ten right now. So we'll see how that ages. Again, only May 2nd, but a lot of interesting possibilities, and you're right. We'll have to talk to Jacob about this, too, because I'm sure he's got a lot of thoughts on this.
My only question with what remains right now, and we'll get back to Husker football here next segment, I do promise. We're still so far away from Husker basketball season, but who is going to be the guy that can step up as being a guy that you can turn to when you need a bucket? Nebraska had that last year in Derek Walker. You'd isolate Derek Walker probably in the high post, let him make a move, and then either distribute or get to the rack and finish. Nebraska had that, a guy that they could turn to when you needed a bucket. I'm not quite sure I see that on this roster, and obviously with 4 new newcomers, you're not quite sure what they're going to bring to a Fred Hoiberg system, but that's the one thing where I still look at and I go, man, you know what? The other team's on an 8-0 run. You need a bucket just to stem the tide. Who is that guy going to be? I don't know if I can see that right now.
It's probably right now it's probably going to be Casey because he's coming back from last year. I will say, though, the group of newcomers this year is the quality of players, I think, is the best group of newcomers that Hoiberg has established. You can make an argument for last year, though, because the results have already spoken. We've
reached that point of the offseason, Connor. Coming up after the break, we're going to hit on Nebraska's practice fields as they're making a big change there. That's what we'll get to next, and maybe some thoughts on the NBA as well, as Kevin Durant now down 0-2 to the Nuggets. We'll hit all of that coming your way. It's Hail Varsity Radio presented by Currency.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Elijah Herbel, Connor Clark taking you through this Tuesday edition of Hail Varsity Radio as Nebraska basketball with another transfer portal commit. Lincoln native Josiah Allick in the boat. He looks, based on what me and Connor think, is being a guy who's going to play that 4 for the Husker basketball spot next season. Obviously, the brother of Becca Allick as well, so a sporting family continues their ties to Nebraska.
He looks like Joakim Noah, which fires me up as a Bulls guy. I hope he plays like him because that would be awesome. I love the fro, the long fro, curly hair type thing. That's going to be NIL deals everywhere for that. Come on. It's got to happen.
Barbershops in Lincoln are going to be licking their chops. The NIL deals. And I love that comparison. Maybe not style of play, but in terms of how he looks, yeah.
He looks exactly like Joakim
If
Noah.
I saw him on the street, I mean, being 6'8", 6'9", like my 6'3" eyes are not going to be able to tell the difference between his height and Joakim Noah's height. If I saw that dude from a distance, I'm like, oh, look, it's Joakim Noah. I'd be like, yeah, it's Joakim Noah.
Yeah.
So fun little aside there. We've had some fun here as Schmidt getting the second hour of this show off as he was in for our conversation with Mitch Sherman back in hour 1, as well as our discussion of Ndamukong Suh back on campus day. We had Matt chiming in on the StreamYard. Matt did say that if for any reason on the stream you did not hear any of Josiah's comments with Mike Sauter, you can check that out on Mike Sauter's Twitter account, or you can check it out after the show whenever we get this posted up in both podcast form and on the Hail Varsity YouTube page. We may have had some issues there, so if you experienced any of those issues via our live stream, again, check it out after the show. But Matt chimes in while we were talking about Ndamukong Suh, saying he was stuck in Iraq during the 2009 season, unable to watch, and he is still angry about that, but he was back in time for the bowl game. And Matt, we thank you for your service, assuming you were in Iraq for service-related purposes. If you weren't, that sounds like a hell of a movie, being stuck in Iraq for the entire 2009 season. That sounds like a plot straight out of Hollywood. But Matt, I'm assuming that you're referring to military service, and for that reason, we thank you, sacrificing Husker football for the greater safety of our country. So Matt, we salute you. Thank you, sir. Before we get out of here this hour, Connor, we still have some thoughts from Dylan Raiola as he sat down with Andy Buehler of SB Live Sports and MSN, as we'll get to that here in just a second. But first, a big change down relating to Nebraska's practice fields as they build a new facility. We got an update from the university today that Nebraska is tearing up the artificial field turf for their practice fields, and they are replacing it with natural grass. Now, why this is important, we literally just heard from Matt Rule yesterday in his sit down with the College Football Daily podcast that Nebraska is not short of resources. They're not short of money. Just to put it simply. And Matt Rule is going to do everything in his power. Like, you know what? It's not about the words, it's about the actions in terms of showing these players that we care for you. And one of those ways is by replacing the field turf. And this has been a huge battle from the NFL Players Association for a couple of years now, essentially saying field turf, artificial field turf, is not safe. And there's numbers to back it up. This came from an article, J.C. Treader, longtime center for the Cleveland Browns. He was also the president of the NFLPA, at least as of last season. And he went into the data, and the data shows you artificial turf is significantly harder on the body than grass. Between 2012, I should say, and 2018, NFL players experienced a much higher rate of non-contact lower extremity injuries on turf when compared to natural grass. Specifically, a 28% higher rate of non-contact lower extremity injuries when playing on artificial turf. Of those, that includes a 32% higher rate of non-contact knee injuries on turf, and this is astronomically high, a 70% higher rate of non-contact foot and ankle injuries on turf when compared to natural grass. And the reasoning for this essentially is because natural grass has a little bit of give to it. If you get a cleat stuck in the dirt, the field turf will give out before a knee or an ankle does, where with artificial turf, it's been stapled down and the surface is so
It's more firm.
Yes, that's a great way of putting it. It's just it's not like grass where you can tear up the roots.
Right.
Essentially, this is plastic that has been stapled into a hard surface down below. It's not going to have as much give for you. So whenever you do have an instance of a cleat getting stuck on a cut, a cleat getting stuck whenever somebody as an offensive lineman rolls up on you, essentially the turf will give before your body does. I should say the grass, and turf will not do that. And the NFLPA has been pushing for this for years, and now Matt Rule matching actions with words, saying, you know what, we've seen the data, we've seen that natural grass is safer, at least I'm assuming, safer than artificial field turf. It's going to cost more. The maintenance and the upkeep over a season of use on natural grass is going to cost a hell of a lot more than artificial turf. But if you can get a 70% reduction in ankle and foot injuries and a 30% reduction in knee injuries, I think the benefits far outweigh the cons. And I think this is Matt Rule showing his guys, you know what? We care about you. We have a caring environment here for our players, a family environment, and we're going to do anything we can to keep you guys healthy and see that we can make it to the NFL, not only a first rookie deal, but also a second contract. And it's going to start by keeping you guys healthy in college. And for that reason, Nebraska flipping over to artificial grass.
Well, this makes me curious, too, about, and they just inserted new field turf in the stadium. Is that going to change at some point? I mean, because you practice on the actual grass, and then a lot of the stadiums that you go play at, not just Nebraska, but almost every single stadium around the Big Ten, with the exception of, I think, Northwestern and like Penn State, they're all field turf. So I wonder, and I get it, you practice more days of the week than you play, obviously, and throughout the year, but I wonder if that'll change anything. Just an outside question to think about, but you read the numbers right off the screen. I have the same ones pulled up, and that is, I knew that turf was like causing more injuries, especially non-contact wise, because it's firmer. You know, your body has more pressure on it when you take a hard cut or something like that. But yeah, 28%, that is a huge number. And then you mentioned the 70% for the foot or the ankle. I mean, that is crazy. And if you're going to risk your guys practicing on that 4 days a week in the fall, I mean, this is a smart move. And you said it earlier too, Matt Rule has always been about, you know, actions over words. I mean, you know the age-old saying, talk is cheap, right? So, I mean, the fact that he's doing it is nice, and I think one player that may be rejoicing about this is Fedoni, considering he's had all these knee issues. I'm not saying it's because of the field turf, but, I mean, maybe that was a contributing factor to it.
I think as a coaching staff, you do everything you can to say, you know, we're going to eliminate the other possibilities. Was this an issue with field turf? We don't know. But we're going to make that switch because we're Nebraska and we can. We have the resources to do so.
He's doing that, and then I know when he was first hired, too, he's talking about all the sports medicine stuff, too, that he likes to implement and making sure the guys have, you know, a top-of-the-line treatment, which they should, because, again, money isn't an issue. Resources aren't an issue at Nebraska, especially when you're putting in the brand-new facility. I mean, the treatment facilities there are going to be top of the line. So you pair that with a new field. I mean, yeah, it shows that this coaching staff is really trying to keep their guys healthy. Not that other coaching staffs around the country aren't, but they're taking the extra step in order to make sure that happens, having as many guys as possible going into the fall healthy, and especially guys who you've had for a couple of years, and it's not just Fedoni, who have a very high ceiling, and you want to display that in front of 90,000 on Saturdays.
And I'm just going to get ahead of this right now. I guarantee there's going to be somebody on Twitter who somebody in Nebraska's practice is going to have a non-contact knee injury, and someone's going to say, I thought they switched to natural grass to prevent this. Well, guess what? Knee injuries happen all the time.
They do.
This is about the occurrence. I mean, Gabe Ervin had that nasty knee injury at Oklahoma a couple years ago, and guess what? Oklahoma plays on natural grass, so it doesn't eliminate it completely. And as you were getting into the fact that Nebraska's stadium is going to be field turf, I wonder if they keep that around for now, get some more data on your natural grass, see what the players think, because whenever I think about nasty weather in Nebraska,
yeah,
natural grass is going to be much more affected by that than field turf. So I think of it not only on a game day, what happens whenever it's pouring rain on a game day, you're going to play because there's no lightning in the area. You're going to have a mud bowl in the stadium, and guess what? It's going to be a lot of upkeep to get that field looking right for a game in a week, a game in 2 weeks. That's going to be serious. And then on top of that, what happens whenever you have a rain all day on Tuesday in the fall in Nebraska, and now your fields are absolutely soaked with water, your practice fields? I think that opens up the possibility of moving back into the stadium and saying we're going to practice in the stadium on the field turf. And hey, not to mention, I know I was not a high-level football player, but back in the day at Lincoln Southeast, we practiced on natural grass and then played on field turf. That's what I like doing. Easier on your body, but then you get out on the field turf, it feels more level whenever you're out there and you feel faster.
Yeah, you do feel faster.
You feel much faster. I'm not sure if you actually are faster or not. Some would say after playing at Northwestern's field, Ryan Field, that you are faster on field turf compared to natural grass, because that's one of the advantages of Ryan Fields. They try to slow down these fast teams.
That's like actually been statistically proven. Like you could just see it too when you watch. Like obviously the turf itself looks so much cleaner, and obviously it's a uniform height and everything's good. And then you go to Northwestern, it's like grass is a little bit longer, you can tell, and when it's rainy, it's muddy, slipping and sliding. I do wonder if there is a technology in work right now, which there probably is, or there will be shortly, if you can make, because the turf's got to go on something, right? Mm-hmm. I wonder if they can make like a layer of sod or whatever between that initial layer to make the turf soft, because I know the turf doesn't have roots.
It's funny. We were literally, before Nebraska went out and played Northwestern, Aviva Stadium, they had like a state-of-the-art playing surface that was a combination. It had both artificial turf elements within as well as natural grass, so it kind of had like that base layer of the rubber, and it had the base layer of like the synthetic turf, and then they had natural grass that grew up through that. So you had both, and that's supposed to be state-of-the-art. That's the standard for UEFA with soccer, and whenever they're going to be playing in like a Champions League final, it's going to be that combination turf. So grass guys, I'm sure there's some lawn dudes in the chat right now watching on the stream.
We need the Haymarket Park grounds crew out here.
Give us a call. Let us know what's going on here, because we've reached that point of the offseason. We're going to be talking for the next couple of months. Man, what type of grass is Nebraska putting in?
Do you like Kentucky bluegrass, or do you like artificial turf?
More of a fescue man myself. Like, it's stupid that we're even like talking about this, but it's important for football. We've reached that part of the offseason where it's like, I guess, where we talk about what type of grass Nebraska is going to be practicing on. But hey, at the end of the day, if you have less non-contact knee injuries, less non-contact ankle injuries, if it's a safer environment for the players, hey, I'm all for it. Nebraska's got the resources to handle it. Can't believe we just talked for damn near 10 minutes about grass.
Grass. I mean, it's what makes the Great Plains green. So, I mean, might as well.
Plenty more to get into here. The final 20 minutes of this show is coming up. We still have information on Dylan Raiola, his sit-down with MSN, as he detailed where he's at in his recruitment, how difficult that decision is going to be for him to make. We also have a new associate director, an associate athletic director of NIL for the University of Nebraska. We'll have more about that next segment, and maybe we'll get into my Denver Nuggets taking a 2-0 lead over Kevin Durant and the Suns, as all of that coming up your way here on a Tuesday edition of Hail Varsity Radio. Again, Chris Schmidt gets the second hour off today, as he is out at the baseball fields watching his son on the mound. We're going to reach out to Schmidt here during the commercial break and see if we can get an update into the pitching performance, see how those Lincoln Southwest Silverhawks are doing. We're going to have Schmidt back in studio tomorrow for your Wednesday edition, 4 to 6. Here locally on KFOR and for our affiliates across the state. But again, we're going to update on Dylan Raiola and his recruitment from MSN coming your way after the break, as well as a new associate athletic director for Nebraska. That's coming up on Hail Varsity Radio, presented by Currency.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Tuesday edition, it's Hail Varsity Radio, where we're presented by Currency. It's Elijah Herbel and Connor Clark filling in today, at least for the second hour, for Chris Schmidt. A reminder, if you missed any of the first hour with Schmidt, you can check that out in podcast form. That is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or check out the video form on Hail Varsity's YouTube page. And if you don't like any of those, your favorite podcasting service, I'm sure, does have Hail Varsity Radio. To search it up, Hail Varsity Radio Show. You will find it for today's and all of our episodes, as Schmidt will be back in studio tomorrow from 4 to 6. And we had a call in during the commercial break from Dave, as Dave gave his his take, I should say, on the AstroTurf versus natural grass debate. And he went back to Mets pitcher Tug McGraw, as Tug was asked back in 1974 whether he preferred natural grass or AstroTurf. And his response, I don't know, I've never smoked AstroTurf. I gotta have a drum hit somewhere in here.
You should have that preloaded. Come on.
Yeah.
That was good. That was good.
Thank you, Tug McGraw, for that one. Let's get into Dylan Raiola here quickly this segment as Dylan Raiola sat down with the good folks over at MSN and Scorebook Live. This is by Andy Bueller, and he kind of ran through his college options, the top 3 for him as he heads off to the Elite 11 camp this summer in Nebraska, Georgia, and USC. As we all know, he gave a quote on each of the 3 explaining why it's going to be such a tough decision for him, as he wanted to lay out the fact that this decision's still far from over on Nebraska. Dylan said, "It was really good getting out there. It was my first time with the new staff, getting to sit down with Coach Sat and Matt Rule and see their vision for that program, understand the offense they're running, and to get familiar with the coaches and everything like that. So it was a very successful visit, and I'm excited for what the program is going to be doing." On USC, he said, "Coach Riley, him hiring Cliff Kingsbury, coaching Patrick Mahomes back at Texas Tech, I think that's pretty cool. It gives me something to think about even more. I think Coach Riley just thinks for himself. He does what he does. He's got 3 Heismans. He's changed OU, and he's already doing great things at SC, so it's exciting to see what he's doing." On Georgia, finally from Dylan Raiola, "It's no secret that I love Coach Smart and what he does. Great leader. His coaching staff is all pulling for the same reasons. They're all on the same page. And just being around Mike Bobo, seeing how I fit in that system is pretty cool, so I'm going to have a hard decision to make, but I'm very blessed to be in the position that I'm in." So that's the update from Dylan Raiola, still keeping his cards pretty close to his chest. Connor, do you think we can take anything away from an interview like that? I mean, it's so hard whenever you're talking about 17-year-old kids and their decisions that could change on a day-to-day basis, and still sounds like the top 3 of Nebraska, Georgia, and USC is there. So did we learn anything?
I don't think so. I mean, in my mind, I think Georgia's still the clear favorite
runner, yep,
in the race for Dylan Raiola. And again, and I'm not saying he's just, essentially coach speaking in the interviews about USC and Nebraska. I think what he had to say was legitimate. I mean, he seems like that type of kid. So I'm not going to discount what he said about Nebraska nor USC, but it's so hard, and I'm not a recruiter, like a recruiting expert by any means, especially with football. So it's hard to, read, especially when it's an article too. I mean, it's so much easier, I think, with a video because you can see their mannerisms. You can see, if they get more excited about talking about this school rather than that school, just kind of like the little, almost like body language type of things. But yeah, I don't think you'll really learn too much from that. I think we'll get a commitment probably sometime over the summer, I would imagine. And as of right now, I think Georgia is still the front runner. I know that isn't what Nebraska fans want to hear nor accept quite yet because the race isn't over technically. But I still think Kirby Smart and the Dogs are in pretty good position right now.
While we're talking about Dylan Raiola's recruitment and really just recruiting in general, I think the timing of Nebraska's addition today of an associate athletic director for day-to-day operations of name, image, and likeness, it's interesting. Mm-hmm. I wonder if this is something that comes from Matt Rule in terms of how do we manage NIL and our NIL resources effectively after you make it through this spring session, you make it through spring football, you make it through, what a big recruiting weekend you had in March, and now a little over a month later, you're one of the handful of programs across the country that now has a full-time associate athletic director who is fully committed to name, image, and likeness. And to give you a little bit of background, the new associate athletic director for name, image, and likeness for Nebraska is Jonathan Bateman. He's been in the compliance department for the University of Nebraska for about 10 years now, and he has served as the associate director of compliance during that time. Now, moving roles, going to be the day-to-day NIL operations manager for Nebraska Athletics and to serve as the primary liaison for all NIL and governance-related operations. Do you look at that? And I'm not saying I have any inside information here by any means. Want to throw that out there. I really like reading tea leaves, reading in between the lines, tying dots together. And I think the timing of this, following a very important spring recruiting session, is interesting. Is it not? That one of the first places that Trev and Matt go following your first real experience. You made it through the class of 2023. You're now into the class of 2024, and you've made it through your first spring recruiting these guys, which is a huge time. And now as you get into summer, now you say, you know what? After what we learned this spring, we need a new director of the day-to-day operations of NIL around Nebraska. I think the timing on that is interesting. That's what I'll say.
Well, maybe that's just what they're missing when it comes to recruits, and that's not just football. I mean, that's every sport, right? And maybe the recruitment with Dylan Raiola has something to do with that. Maybe the recruitment process with Hunter Salas has something to do with that. I mean, that could also be something in there if you wanted to throw an extra wrinkle into that story. So the timing is definitely interesting. I'll agree with that. And I think it's something that Nebraska needs, and it's appropriate. It's an appropriate hire because you already have the 1890 initiative, and that's catered to the student athlete to get their NIL deals. You have Open Doors and all these other companies helping them out throughout Lincoln. And then you add this in-house too with an associate athletic director. I mean, that could change things around too. Not that NIL's been bad here. I mean, it's been great ever since it got started. What is it, 2 years ago now almost? So I think it's an appropriate hire. I think you get help with recruiting, especially with a guy that has the stature of Dylan Raiola. And again, that really makes me curious too with the Hunter Salas thing. The more that I think about that, because I mean, I'm going to be honest, when I heard it was Nebraska or Wake Forest, I was like 75-25 Nebraska that he was going to pick. So I don't know how much of NIL, and I know Wake Forest has been a pretty good basketball program here the past couple of years, but that's something, if you wanted to make it a more interesting topic than maybe it actually is, maybe read into that a little bit more.
I mean, whenever you go in-house for a guy like this, and again, no inside information, that usually indicates to me that this is something you wanted to get done quickly. You didn't want to go try to field a pool of applicants from across the country. You wanted to get somebody in this role. You wanted to get somebody in this role now, so you're going to find somebody that fits the criteria in-house that you already have, so you can just move them over. It's a seamless transition. You can get things moving. You essentially can hit the ground running. I look at this as being something that this university learned some things about NIL this spring. As I mean, we talked about it whenever NIL first started. It was a wild, wild west, and teams were going to be learning on the fly with how NIL works, and I think this is a great example of that. Nebraska's learning on the fly, and I look after a huge spring recruiting session, as you mentioned, not only for football, but also for basketball, and now you say, well, let's get somebody in-house that's going to run our day-to-day NIL operations, somebody that you would assume recruits can talk to when they're on visits, as opposed to going directly to the collectives themselves as a part of this recruitment, or going directly to the businesses in Lincoln, going directly to an Open Door, so you can have somebody within the university that they go to first. I just look at that and I say, as we need to get to a break here right now, I think this is Nebraska learning from maybe not mistakes of the spring, but they are learning from what they saw in the spring. We need to get to a break. It's Hail Varsity Radio presented by Currency. Back next segment.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Elijah Herbel and Connor Clark with you here, a Tuesday edition of Hail Varsity Radio, and let's start this out by giving an apology to our affiliates from across the state. If you've worked in radio for long enough, you will know there comes a moment in every person's career in radio where you have hard breaks. You have a certain time you have to get out, and you look up at the clock and say, what time do I need to be out for this break? Oh, 10 seconds ago. That happened to me. I fell victim to that about 5 minutes ago. So I do apologize to our affiliates from across the state. May have sounded a little jacked up going out of that segment and getting back into this one. I take full credit. That was my bad. I'll work to be better.
You're fired.
Yeah, how funny would that be? That was the final straw for me. So it's time to get out of radio. I'm going into, I don't know, politics. That'd be fair on election day.
I mean, you did vote, so.
Well, I was. This is funny. I was looking into some news coverage of the election today, and who do I see on TV talking about the candidates in his election but my own father. So my dad, funny, leaving the polling place this morning, got pulled over by Jake Bartecki from News Channel Nebraska. Thanks, Jake. He interviewed my dad. And
nice.
My dad's on the news, so that's always an interesting thing to see, because I go, You'd think with a son in radio, you think he'd be better at answering these questions than he is. He's telling me, he's like, yeah, it's they put you on the spot. You don't know what to say. So
I mean, you got to teach him better, I guess.
Reverse
the role a little bit there. Yeah.
Well, before we get out of here, Connor, quickly, I promised it. I need to talk about it. Schmidt gave me the keys to the show, so I'm going to do it. The Denver Nuggets up 2-0 on Devin Booker, Chris Paul, Kevin Durant, and the Phoenix Suns. Nobody saw it coming. The Nuggets, despite being the 1 seed or your underdog story out of the West, I'm going to say it. I'm going to roll with it. That's what the team says. That's what I'm going to say. They're up 2-0 on the Suns. The Suns really did everything they could last night. They held the Nuggets under 100 points scoring, but the Nuggets in turn held the Suns under 90 points scoring. I think just in general, it's been a more physical playoffs. We saw that last night. If you haven't checked out the NBA playoffs this year, the refs have been swallowing their whistle a lot more than they have this year than in recent years. I'm wondering if some of those declining NBA ratings have led the NBA to make a change, talk to their refs for the postseason. Hey, we're going to let it be more physical, more like the 90s and early 2000s. So far, I have loved the results, and I've loved what my Nuggets have been doing in the first 2 rounds.
Yeah, I mean, they've looked absolutely fantastic. I watched game 1 of that series, and Jamal Murray was absolutely phenomenal, and so was Jokic, and they have been for as long as they've been with the Nuggets, it feels like. It didn't really feel like Phoenix came to play in game 1. I'm going to be honest with you. I think Denver's going to end up winning the series probably in 6. I think Phoenix probably finds a way to win 2 of them because they're just too talented not to. And, I mean, I think that the injury to Kevin Durant is really starting to rear its ugly head because of the lack of this core playing together in the regular season. May be starting to show, but the Nuggets look really good. Also, we get LeBron and Steph again tonight, game 1 at 9, so that'll be, for our generation, a lot of nostalgia.
Well, there you go, listeners. We kept our NBA talk to under 3 minutes. You're welcome. We'll have more Nebraska talk tomorrow, 4 to 6. Chris Schmidt back in studio. Check us out in podcast form, wherever you get podcasts or the Hail Varsity YouTube page. Check out today's show, and we'll be back tomorrow from 4 to 6. It's Hail Varsity Radio, presented by Currency.